Genealogist General Forum number 7, and our special guest today is Denise Hall, Senior Staff Genealogist. I want to reemphasize some concepts that need to go across to everybody. When you're trying to get in touch with the genealogy staff, email is appropriate, but it should be going through your state point of contact, and at this point, it's Steve Hinson for Georgia. Limit your telephone calls to the staff. The real difficulty you'll have right now is that the staff is off-site a good portion of the time to be prepared for what we hope is going to be some renovation of the second floor at the building. And pending applications, we need to make sure that anything that is sent to the genealogy staff needs to come through the point of contact. One item that I need to address, and I want to make sure somebody's thinking about it, distribution of completed applications. One of the problems we have is feedback to our chapter registrars. And there are two ways that I know of that we can get this distribution of completed applications so that you can review what has happened with your application and what worked and what didn't work. Number one is your state society could distribute to each application to their chapter registrar in addition to sending to the chapter president. Or one state is using ShareFile and putting all the completed applications into a ShareFile so that each of the state or the chapter registrars can go into that ShareFile and look for the ones that they have. And the third option, some of you are already taking advantage of that, is that you can become a PRS volunteer and you'll get to see the applications as soon as they're loaded into the PRS. But the bottom line is you as a chapter registrar need to know what has happened to the applications that you send in, what is working, what is being put parentheses around, and why that's occurring. Next area is administrative discrepancies. We are trying to cut down on those across the board. Things like payments, the appropriate fee, getting completed DAR record copies that are coming in, the birth certificates with the mail on them, getting the dates in the appropriate format. Those are administrative discrepancies that will be turned back to you in a pre-check, but we need to try to cut those down so we can get into actually getting our applications to the genealogy staff. And this afternoon, we have the opportunity to listen to Denise Hall. She is the senior genealogist in Louisville, and she has trained at least 3, if not more, of the current staff. Before we get started, I want to make sure you can see the buttons that are on your screen someplace. Look for the mute button and make sure that you're mute as we're going through this presentation. Then I want you to look at about 4 or 5 places over, and it's called the chat button. And I want you to be able to write your questions as you go. When Denise makes a comment, you're going to have some comments, you're going to have some statements, or you're going to have some questions. And I need you to put those in the chat so that we don't forget them. And we'll go back over those after Denise has finished your presentation. When we're done with the presentation, you'll also have a chance to raise your hand, and you can look at that for trying to say, I want to talk now, and I will try to recognize those, and hopefully Denise can field those, or if I need to field them, I will do that as well. So with that, Denise, I'm going to unshare, then you need to pick up and share your screen, and then it's your program.
Okay, let's see here. Where am I going here? This. Hold on just a second. Okay. Right. everybody see the screen like I'm seeing with the presentation on it? Okay. I hope that you all have maybe printed a copy of this presentation I sent out yesterday. I know for me personally, it's easier for me to follow along on a printed copy and make notes as I go. Thanks for attending. I hope this will help you submit applications that are correctly completed along with acceptable and correctly printed documentation. As everyone's aware, the turnaround time for reviewing applications is a constant issue. Although right now we have gotten the turnaround time for new member applications down to about 4 weeks, maybe less. But we want, if they're completed correctly, we can get through a review in even 30 minutes. When they're not completed correctly, that lengthens our review time and slows down the whole process. So I'm hoping that you'll see some examples today of how the process can move more quickly. There are two things we don't have any control over. One of those is how many apps are awaiting review. I think of this in the way that think of going to Cracker Barrel at noon on a Sunday versus 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. You're going to wait much longer on Sunday at noon than you are Wednesday at 3 o'clock. So there are times of the year that the applications, we get more applications than at other times of the year. So it's all going to be dependent upon that. And the other item that we don't have any control over is the quality of the applications, which is the focus of today's training. Okay. This isn't working exactly like a PowerPoint slideshow would because we had to convert it to a PDF. There were some licensing issues on this laptop we're using. Okay, so the first thing I want to explain is what path that the applications, what the path is when applications get to headquarters. When does it go to whom, and how it finally ends up in genealogy. First, the mail is opened and the transmittal sheet is date stamped. Let me go ahead and interject right here. If you're submitting family apps, that all go, obviously family plan apps all have to be the same lineage and patriot and so forth. You want to make sure you're putting them on one transmittal together, preferably a single transmittal without other applications on it. Just put the family apps on there. If you're submitting supplementals for the same member or for family members, like a couple of brothers, get those all together on the same transmittal, because the documentation will have to sync up with those applications. If they're separated on separate transmittals, various genealogists could pick them up, because we go to the drawer and we get the next application in the queue. So if they're separated, one might not have any documentation with us. So just make sure you keep those together when they are submitted to national. Okay, after the mail is opened and it's date stamped, it goes to the finance department, who accounts for the checks. Then finance takes it to registrar John Toon. He or his assistant, which he's gotten a new assistant now because the other one retired about 3 months ago. So the new assistant, Tim Taylor, just started last week. So they enter the basic information into the application database, the contact info for the applicant and so forth, and they issue the ACN numbers, which get handwritten at the top. Then they come over to genealogy. Genealogy now, for the last few months, has been pre-checking the apps, make sure they're printed correctly, the date format is correct. If there are any DAR applications in there, if they are printed correctly, and so forth. And if the birth certificate states the gender on it. These are things that we're trying to do ahead of them coming up in the drawer for review, so that we can hopefully get the right documents in before it comes up for review. And that we don't have to pend it after it's sat there for a month or so. If we get the documentation in that length of time, it won't get pended for that. Then when it comes up for review in the queue, the genealogists review the applications, like I said, in the order they were received.
Hey, this is Joey.
Joey, we made some changes while you were gone.
I see. I'm in deep trouble.
I think you need to mute yourself, Joey.
Well, you probably just say too bad. But
I don't think I've ever told you too bad in your entire life.
listen, I've got the Zoom problems and I can't get audio. You know, and I've tried this program.
Okay, Denise, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so once we approve an application, they are handed back over to the registrar, who processes them and registers them, issues national numbers for the new member applications, prints the certificates and all those things. They are then, those things are then sent to the state secretary for distribution, either to the member directly or to the chapter. Different states do it different ways. And the same goes for the supplemental apps when they're approved. He processes them in the same manner. So let's move to the next. Okay, so I mentioned the pre-check of applications. They get, first thing, Kelly, the administrative coordinator, when she gets them in the mail, she opens the mail, she makes sure that the fees and dues are for the correct amounts. She makes sure that all the signatures apply. New member applications must have 5 signatures. And if they don't, we have to hold them up till we get the correct signatures. The applicant, state registrar, state secretary, and 2 sponsors. Now, if it comes in, it's got 1 sponsor, it's got all the rest, but only 1 sponsor, somebody here can sign it and we go ahead and move it through. Supplemental apps have to have the member's signature and the state registrar signature. Otherwise, these are going to get held up. Mike Scroggins generally will send them back or send an email and a copy back telling the state secretary, I believe he sends them to, that we need those items taken care of. We still have some that get through, but they're supposed to be checking to see if they're printed correctly on legal size paper on the back and front of 1 sheet of our watermark paper facing the same direction, not one facing up and one facing down. And like I said, they'll be held up. They won't be in the database. So if you ever have one, you're wondering, well, we sent it in and such a date, but it's not showing up on the status report. It could have been held up by an administrative area because something was wrong with it in these ways, that they weren't entered into the database at all yet. We don't do that until everything's resolved. And they won't appear on the status report until then. Okay. So I've already told you, from the administrative coordinator, it goes to finance to the registrar's office, and they do a double check for the signatures and paper and so forth in registrar's office. Okay, so once again, the pre-checks, looking for birth certificates, the state gender, DAR applications are correctly printed and complete. We get a number of these in that are DAR record copies, and they can't be chapter copies. They have to be record copies purchased from DAR. But we get a lot of them in where the record copy was printed legal size, but on standard size paper, so the bottoms are cut off, or the tops, or both sometimes. So you just make sure you do a visual check to see that the entire application is there, because it will be held up if not. And like I said, that's something we're trying to catch at the front end. They also have to be they can't be chapter copies, they have to be record copies. And I know a lot of even DAR members are, have a little bit of hard feelings about that. But one reason is we don't want to cut the $10 fee that DAR gets by going around that, and their chapter registrars are not supposed to be doing this. They can print one for their member, but really not for this purpose. Another reason, well, DAR chapter copies will have on the first page all the contact information for the applicant, which really shouldn't be shared necessarily. The other reason that the record copies are more valuable is because that first cover page that takes the place of the first page of the real copy has the latest information, the latest approved information for the Patriot on it, and any corrections they have made in the correction files or any flags they may have. Otherwise, the application is static. They never go back and change anything on the actual applications like SAR does. Of course, we will make a change if something is incorrect, and then we rescan it for the database. DAR never does that. If anything very pertinent comes up, like in correction in lineage or service, or to the Patriots information, that's reflected on that first page. Otherwise, you're not going to get it on a chapter copy. So just remember, the latest is always on the cover page of that DAR record copy purchased from DAR. Okay, and CAR transfers must also be submitted along with a certificate of good standing that CAR headquarters issues and a CAR record copy. Okay. Most common reasons applications are pending. Missing a birth certificate, or if it doesn't state gender. It also should include names of both parents, including the mother's maiden name, particularly if the line goes through her. This is really important. You can't just jump the line there and, you know, have a mother with a first name identified on a hospital birth certificate, but not her maiden name, and then you jump to finding her on a census somewhere because you know what her maiden name is. It's got to be proven first. That goes for every generational connection that switches to the female line. And incorrectly printed DAR applications, like I just said, incorrect date format in the lineage. All the dates must be entered as what I've got on there: 01 January, first 3 letters of each month, no periods, and the year. No slashes between the numbers, but 1 space between the day and the month and the year. And never enter the dates as like 1/1/2023. The only time you're going to use a slash mark in the date field is if you're using it to indicate or, like you have two different dates or 2 different years, and neither one of them have come from a primary document. So you're always going to, if it's a death certificate, let's say you've got a death certificate and you've got a tombstone, let's say the years are different, you're going to go with that primary document, the death certificate, not what's on the tombstone, because that's not really primary. But if you've got a tombstone and a I don't know, a family history, and they've got 2 different years on them, and that's all you've got, you can use a slash between the years to indicate or. Okay, I've already talked about DAR record copies and incorrectly printed DAR record copies. Not providing adequate proofs for parent to child connections, including resolution of naming conflicts. This is a particular problem when you've got a person who you get down through the generations and he's called one name, and then you put him with his parents and he's called another name. Put him with his parents on census or whatever, it's called another name. You may feel that that one of them's first name, one of them's middle name, which can be true, but that has to be, along with, if you only get initials, those have to be, the naming conflicts have to be resolved. One way you can do this, and I've done it in the past many times, is look for, so let's say generation 4 to 5. 4, he's named Thomas all the way down, but with his parents, he's named Charles. Look for other children of his and look at their death certificates or marriage records, see what the parents' names are. And a lot of times you can piece them together and come up with the complete name so that, you know, we don't have to pin those. If you only have a census that has initials on it, for one thing, for somebody, you're going to need something else to go with those initials. And that one census is probably not going to make it. Okay. And not providing enough adequate proofs for the Patriots generation. We often see where applications, they prove the lineage down to the Patriot and then they stop. We need to have adequate proofs that the Patriot was of an age to have performed the service being claimed, was alive at the time of the service being claimed, and was living in whose residency aligns with the service being claimed. So you can't just stop and then think because you've attached the line through child to a name that's all we need. So those need to be, those kind of things need to be proven. And like Gary said a minute ago, when application is pending, all communications to and from the genealogy staff must only be with and through the state point of contact or registrar, not individual chapter members or the applicants. It's really better if you're able to not just forward our pinned email to an applicant, because they very often think that they're the ones who have to come up with whatever the resolution is, which may be true, but that then they're the ones responsible for getting back to us. That's not the case. It should go back through the state point of contact, the state registrar, to be vetted before he then forwards it to us. Okay, common reasons for slowdowns, superfluous documentation. You know, if you have a death certificate, we don't also need a tombstone, an obit, a cemetery census, you know, all that kind of thing. That slows us down getting through all that documentation. Lengthy or incorrectly prepared proof arguments. We get proof arguments, believe it or not, that are 100 pages and have 50 pages of supporting documentation. Any proof argument, though, does need every fact stated in that proof argument to be proven by documents. You can't make claims like, you know, Bill was Joseph's brother without having, as part of the proof argument, without having supported that with primary documents. Putting lineage data on the application that's not supported by documentation. This is a huge slowdown for us. There's no reason to put lineage data on the application that's names, dates, and places that aren't supported by documentation. If you don't have the documentation, just leave it off. If it's on there, we have to go back through the application when we get to the end of the review and try to figure out if we missed something or, you know, what the case was. And then we have to bracket them all. By bracketing, I mean putting parentheses around it, because everything that we put parentheses around is data that was either incorrect or unproven. So let's just leave those out and have only the data on there that's supported by documentation. Incorrectly entered or missing data on applications based on the documentation submitted. So what we see a lot is it appears that a lot of applicants, maybe the applicants themselves who aren't really familiar with this process, are filling out their own applications, but not from documentation, but rather throw documentation at it after the fact. That's not, you know, that's not the way it works. And then we have to go back and make multiple corrections to it. So got to start with the documentation to complete the applications. Incorrectly printed or unreadable documentation that we have to look up and reprint. And all the images need to be printed in their entirety and be legible. If you can't read them, we can't read them. And there'll be a little bit further in this presentation are some examples of incorrectly printed documentation and how they can look when they're printed correctly. Okay, how to prepare them. Like I said, just always complete an application from the documentation. Advise the applicants not to type an application, then add documents. Like I said, only include data that's supported by documentation. When possible, don't ask inexperienced applicants to complete their own applications. I'd give them a worksheet and say, fill it out. If they want to do it on a computer, that's fine. I generally, if I'm working on an application for somebody outside of work, I use pencil or pen and just make notes on the worksheet. And then make sure that all the data is entered correctly before printing the final copy and obtaining the signatures. If they're, like I said before, if they're completed correctly, we can get through them in as little as 30 minutes. We have state societies who do usually a really good job of all these things that I've talked about, of only including data that's proven by documentation and double checking it first, and then we can get through them really quickly, and that way we can get more done. Also bear in mind, this is really important, that if you submit a deficient application, you are risking the fees paid by your applicant. And now, you know, it's $100. The application fees are non-refundable, because after we've worked an application, that money's already been spent on the review. They can get refunded, if requested, refunded the dues they paid, if the application cannot be salvaged, or if they don't submit replacement applications that go through. The new member applications are allowed 2 more chances to resolve with replacement applications, and supplementals may be replaced once. After 3 years of pending, those applications will be withdrawn. And we don't give notice. We used 2 years ago give notice that, oh, these are going to be withdrawn, but it's up to you all to police that yourselves, of when an application was pending, and 3 years out, it's going to be withdrawn. Now, you can apply for an extension, but you have to be up on that yourself. We're not going to, you know, we're not going to go through telling you all that it's coming up. Okay. Entering lineage data correctly on applications. I'm not going to bore you with all these things, but I'll make a few points here. Enter the full names when provided by documentation. You'd be surprised at the number of applications we get. Even the applicant's name is not his full name, but his birth certificate we get shows his full name. So then we have to sit there and write in the middle name or whatever, or they use initials or a nickname. And speaking of nicknames, the second bullet point is, you know, you're going to put, if a nickname is used like Mary Polly Smith, the nickname goes in quotation marks. Let's see, what else do I want to? Oh, a woman's maiden name, if she was married before she marries the man in the lineage, it'd be Mrs. First, middle, and maiden name, then her former married surname. So I've kind of explained this in here. We're not looking for you to put in the married surname if she subsequently marries after her husband in the lineage is dead or they divorce or whatever. We're not looking for that. Now, it may be necessary to prove why she perhaps dies with a different surname. And that's just included in the documentation. She may have remarried and so forth, but it's not relevant to the lineage part of the application. I already explained the date format, state locations. The only used for states, don't spell out state names, just use the 2-letter uppercase abbreviations with no periods. And city, county, and state. You see the examples on there of how to, if you just have a county and a state, or you just have a city and a state, or you have all 3. I've lined that out in here for you to refer to. Like I said, I think I said, leave all non-applicable fields completely blank. Do not, in people who are living, like in generations 1 to 3, don't put living in the death date field. Just leave it blank. Don't enter NA or unknown or UNC or question marks or any of those. Just leave them completely blank. Okay, for in the references section, cite all the references used. You do not need to explain what the proof or the connections provide. You know, you don't, we know that. You don't have to say 1860 census shows so-and-so in the household of so-and-so, whatever. We get that. We know, we've seen enough censuses to understand what those mean. Let's see, I would also proof all the applications for accuracy afterwards, compare it side by side with the documentation. That also help you pick up misspellings, you know, dates, date fields that are wrong and so forth. All right. Okay, for correctly versus incorrectly printed documentation, you can't, so what we do in whatever the program is that we're using, Ancestry, Family Search, and so forth, we download the images to our computer and crop them. We can adjust the brightness and so, etc. To it's particularly helpful for census records because we all know how bad they can be. Don't go up to the, don't get it on the screen and then go up to the print command on your web browser because you will get screwed up images that way. I'm going to show you some examples. Then bullet point 3, wills. If you pull up a will book, such as in Family Search or Ancestry, print wills 1 page at a time. That means you're viewing the image itself, which is a 2-page spread, a double-page spread, usually of 2 legal-size documents. We get them in all the time where that double-page spread is printed on half of a standard-size piece of paper. It doesn't need to be that way. It's not very readable. So if you download the double-page spread, crop to one side, print that page, and crop to the other side and print that page, it'll be more readable. And we need them to be readable. Besides the fact, you know, these are going to be scanned. The readability will diminish a little bit. So the best image that you can get initially will be more valuable. If you're printing an indexed version of a record, like from Ancestry, where there isn't an image associated with it, use a print command from the website rather than your web browser. Again, you'll get a screwed up version if you print from your print browser. If you're submitting pages from a book, you must include the book's title page that includes a publication date. That publication date may be on a separate page, so you'll have to print that one too. And within the book, you need to submit the full page of the page that your information you're looking for is on, not just clips. I'll give you a little story. Several years ago, I had a application I was reviewing, and they submitted a page from a book that I could tell was cut off at the bottom a little bit. So I went and found the book online and I printed it. And what do you know? The last line they cut off negated what they were trying to prove. So then you need to print the whole thing because we will check. Tombstone photos must include the place of burial. That is the cemetery name and the location. Now you can go on Find a Grave and you can print the memorial page that gives that information and then print the tombstone separately if it needs to be readable. They need to be, that's the next bullet point tells you they need to be period appropriate. That is, they can't be one erected 100, 200 years later. They have to be close to the period of time the person died, and they need to be readable. So if they're not, we're not taking what the person who constructed the Fandegrave Memorial wrote, because that's all user entered information, and there's no reason to underline any of it. You know, and that also goes for the kinship connections that are on the Fandegrave pages. We don't take those. That's all user entered. So you don't rely on those. Okay, so 1850 to 1880 federal censuses, as I was talking about printing correctly, they are generally, well, they're always in portrait orientation, which means vertical. So you need to print them in the right orientation to get the best readability. So this is an example of an 1880 census. When you get to 1900, they're virtually square, and I just let the computer pick out which way it wants to print. But printing full page, we need the entire census document, not just a snippet, or not, excuse me, not covering up anything, because we need to see the family in context with other people. We need to see the top of the census that shows the location and the date and so forth. So don't crop anything out. Don't send partial pages. If they're printed full size, you usually don't need to do an enlargement separately. And if you've downloaded it and cropped out the black edging, and you have adjusted the brightness and the tone and all that, you usually pull out a pretty good image. If you can't, after all that, then you can print the whole thing first and then do an enlargement of a section. We will take that. 1910 to 1940 censuses are landscape. That's horizontal. So if you print those correctly, they're going to be readable like that too. If you print them to where they're on a page that's printed in portrait orientation, vertical, you're going to get a much smaller image and it's going to be harder to read. 1950 switches back to portrait orientation. So readability is a factor there, and those are pretty well done. They're scanned better. Now I'm going to show you some of the ones that we've actually gotten, and you tell me if you can read any of these. So this one I think is an 1880 census. It was printed, I'm sure, by using the web browser's printer function. And this one is a piece of a page the same way. Okay, here's an example I did of a death certificate that I had in an application I was reviewing. On the left shows the state it was in when I got it. So then I pulled it on one of the websites and printed it using the ability to adjust the tone and the brightness and all that. And so you can read it. The other one's really not usable for us. Now, a lot of people ask me what image program I use. I use Microsoft Office Picture Manager. It's part of the Office program. However, I understand that Microsoft's getting rid of it, which is disturbing. You know, a lot of times the best software that you've used is or ones that they end up getting rid of. But some people use a free program called IRFAN View, IRFAN View. And you can do the same things, I understand, with that one. I've just gotten used to using Microsoft Office Picture Manager, so that's what it's easiest for me. Okay, so this is an example. In this book is a marriage book. I went across the river in Indiana and got this marriage record from my grandparents. But they have it on this before Family Search had it. And so when you download it, you get this, or when you see it on the screen, you get this double page spread, like I was talking about with wills and deeds and so forth. Well, I don't want to print that because I only need the one on the left for my grandparents. And it'd be harder to read having two legal size pages like that on one standard size print. So if you download it to your computer, crop away the right-hand page and only leave the left-hand page, crop off the black edging around it, adjust the brightness, then you get a good one like this. And that's what I did with their record. So, and the program I use, like I said, Microsoft Office Picture Manager, and I'm sure IRFAN View is the same way, very simplistic. There are only a few commands that you can use on there, and it's simple for me. So when you can have, it's got rotate, so you can straighten up an image before you crop it and print it, adjust the tone and brightness and so forth, and crop. Those are the main things that you'll use on these, and that's about all you need. All right, so what I'd like y'all to take away from this will be how to review the applications like we do, which is what you should be doing before you're submitting them. So make a plain paper copy of the application. You're not going to mark on the actual application. You're going to mark only on this plain paper copy, so that you're not disturbing the one that's going to be sent in. Place the documents beside it. Flip through each individual document and place a check mark over each individual piece of data on the application that's verified by each document. You can see where your mistakes are, or where the applicant's mistakes are, or whoever typed the application, where the mistakes are, by doing this. And hopefully you can get them corrected before the final printing. That would be ideal. As you go, when a parent-to-child connection is proven by the documentation, let's say the birth certificate of the applicant, you check off his name, date of birth, place of birth, and his parents' names, then you're going to put a little line, whatever you want to put. I don't care. You can put an X. I don't know. But something between those two generations that lets you know as you go, not later, as you go, that you've made that connection. That is what we do. That's the exact process that we follow here. Do it every time before you move to the next generation's proofs. Remember, when you're switching to the female line, her maiden name must be proven before connecting to her parents. Don't assume that Mary Jo, who's married to, Bob Smith, is the Mary Jo that's on a census with Thomas and, Jane Brown. We don't know that. Her maiden name has to be proven first before we can show her with her parents on a census or in a will or whatever. Omit any data that's not proven by documents and make the changes to the incorrectly entered data. When using a previously approved SAR/DAR application for proof, ensure that the data ticked as verified on those applications is correctly entered on your SAR application you're working on, that you're reviewing. Any data that was bracketed, placed in parentheses, or line through should be omitted on the new SAR application you're working on. Any amended data should be incorporated as well. So if there was a change made, or like a date was amended and written in by the SAR/DAR genealogist who worked on that previous application, you're going to put in the corrected data on the SAR application you're working on. We very often get in applications that are based on a DAR or SAR application, but the same data that was corrected or bracketed on the previous applications were ignored. And that's just extra time eaten up during our reviews that doesn't need to be. Verify the Patriots data is entered correctly and is consistent with proving service. Like I said about the residency and age and that kind of thing. The description of service that goes to the top of the application is not just like if he was a private in Virginia, it's not just private Virginia or PVT VA. You're going to probably put in his commanding officer's information and so forth. If you look at DAR record copies, you can see how they do it. And that's what I kind of use as a guideline for that. You don't have to put in every, like in Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors, they will give you an entire description that includes dates and how many miles and all that. We don't need all that. But if you put in their service, put in what it is, put in the rank, the officers' names, the state, if they did patriotic service. Don't put patriotic service in there because that's a category. You're going to put in took oath of allegiance, paid supply tax, those kinds of things. That's what we want in the description of service. The abbreviation we put at the top when we approve an application is just a category so that we can look up, we know we're looking up the right patriot later. And ensure that the references for proving service are entered correctly. Don't just enter an SAR or DAR number. That doesn't tell us anything. If we need to go back and check, we need to know where the actual service came from. If it was an SAR application, just type in whatever proof of service was on the previous SAR application. If the previous SAR application just had an SAR number, then we're going to need to look that up somehow. And then the DAR, you're going to put in DAR number, whatever, sites, and then put whatever proof of service. Like in this case, I put DAR number 178395, sites PA Archive, Series 5, Volume 3, page 36. You're going to put it in. That way we always have something to track back to. Okay, move on. So this is an example of starting to review an application at your local level, like I was explaining just before this. So this is a plain paper application. And so this reflects what the documents were for generation 1. So I had actually changed the names of generations 1 and 2. This is an application I did recently, actually for the Georgia Society, the Mount Vernon chapter for my boyfriend's brother, but I changed the names on here. So I had his birth certificate. I had his wife's birth index, I believe. And then I had their marriage record. And so I checked off all that, and on his birth certificate, named parents. So I checked their names off. So that's all that I got with generation 1. That takes me to generation 2. I put a line between because I know I've proven that connection. And you'll continue that on the other generations. So I went forward from there, checked off everything for generation 2, found the connection in those documents to generation 3, and made that mark between the generations to know that I had made those connections. And I took this one down to 4, and but it's all following the same procedure. This way, you'll know as you go if something's lacking. You know, you will catch your own or your applicant's mistakes if you do this methodically in this manner. Okay, I'm including on here some trainings that we have on the SAR website and how to find them. And you're going to look on the genealogy tab, genealogy resources, and also under that tab, you can go to the SAR genealogy policies manuals, and you can get more information there. All the chapter registrars should be looking at that and becoming familiar with that. And then under the main part of the page itself, or a number of trainings, I've done some of them, other people have done some of them, and you can click on them and watch them at your leisure at any time and refer other people to them. Okay, so that's the end of this. Now, do we have questions out there?
Denise, we did have one question from the state point of contact. Can the state point of contact make corrections to an application before it goes in? My initial reply is you can have up to 5 pen and ink application or adjustments
Right.
by the state genealogist or point of contact.
Right.
But then he asked, does that mean 5 brackets or 5 marks, or which way would you interpret that?
Well, that was the way the policy was written. I mean, and I've wondered that myself. Does it include an entire date, or is each number is incorrect? I would say keep it at a minimum. I would also say that if you make a correction, I would advise, because this is not policy, instead of marking something out or bracketing it, if you get a little whiteout pen like we've got, carefully white out what you're correcting and then write it back in, black ink, be legible, not cursive, about the same size as the type on the application, it's going to look a lot better and be more readable. There's often times where I've gotten them in and they're a bunch of corrections, but they're sloppy and not very readable. So I have whitened them out and written them in, you know, in a readable fashion with a black ballpoint pen, and it just turns out better that way. Or you can just let us make the corrections when we review them. I realize, I think that some of the fellows out there want us to know that they saw those errors and want to correct them. Either way is fine. But we don't have a real statement on, we got the statement of 5 corrections, but we don't have a statement clarifying what they can be.
Okay. Got another question. If I put in an initial application and I didn't add my wife's birth certificate, and I got the wife's birth certificate, and I do a supplemental, how do I let you know that I'm adding that data when I put the supplemental in? What is the indicator you would have?
Well, for one thing, the document itself would be the indicator. Otherwise, you can put in the references that, you know, you're adding that the generation 1, you can say birth certificate of wife, in parentheses, maybe new information.
Okay.
I know they do that on DAR applications. I've seen that on previously approved generations where somebody's added something to correct or to enhance what was previously approved. So I would just do it that way.
Okay. Michael Black, you want to come on and ask your question live so that everybody can hear it? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry, I typed it in. I just wanted to make sure I was still correct. I know a lot of prospective members use those really old SAR applications that are on Ancestry.com, and I've told them it's a good guide, but you have to reprove everything on there because they're so old. That's still correct.
Right,
Okay.
because those applications only go up to 1970, and it's a rarity that we find any documentation in the file from actually prior to 1978. So those are not going to have documentation to back them up, and they're going to need to prove them.
That's what I thought.
Yep. Anybody else?
There was Sid, Bonnie, you want to ask your question?
Unmute yourself. You're going to have to unmute yourself. Okay.
Okay, I hadn't had a chance to check my emails. You mentioned sending out previously possible print out material in an email before this
I
class.
sent it out yesterday.
Okay, if I did not get that email and I need to check, is it okay for me to send you an email requesting it so you can send it back to me?
Absolutely. dhall@sar.org.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I want to prompt you folks. This is being recorded, and we want to get this information out to everybody. So if you have any question that you did not feel was addressed, this is the right time to ask it, so others will have answers for the
It
same
looks like
questions.
Steve.
At what point, because we get some of your applications come back and look like they've just been bled all over.
Now what? I couldn't hear you very well.
The application's been bled all over. Excuse me. There's so many corrections made on it. Do y'all have a point where y'all send it back to be corrected, or do y'all just keep?
No, and I tell you one reason is because we've already accepted the money. So we trudge ahead with the review. Even if we have to make a lot of corrections, we do the review. And because we have to see if we need to pin it anyway. So we have to go ahead and work through it.
Okay, a question on dependent applications. When somebody sends a new one to replace one, that one never shows up anywhere.
The old one doesn't?
or the new one doesn't show up?
I don't know what you mean shows.
Well, like one's pending and it's on the pending file,
Right,
okay? So I send you a new one to replace that application.
right. So on the application status report, after we receive a replacement application and we approve it, the new Patriot's name goes in the database. But
But you never see on the status pages.
yes. After it's approved, it should show up with the new Patriot's name because we do that in the application database. But it's not going to remain on that status report for a long time. You know, it'll only remain, I think, that's kind of not my side of things, but until Jonathan registers them. But it's not going to, when you send in a replacement, it's not automatically going to show the new Patriot's name in the database because until after we've worked it and it's been approved.
And I'm glad y'all took out the genealogy date on the status report. That column.
Right, the genealogy date. Yeah, that was taken off.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's confusing because the genealogy approved date and the registered date were confusing people. And, you know, there's a lot of administrative work that goes into this. We approve them, then it goes to the registrar to work on the registration process. And so people think, oh, it's been genealogy approved. Why haven't we gotten it yet? Well, it may be a week or more before it goes through the registration process because they're done in batches for one thing. And Jonathan has been without an assistant for 3 months. So it's the registration date that counts more than anything anyway. That is their date of membership, technically.
And just for everybody's background, Jonathan usually does the registrations effective on Fridays. So it could be a week after, at the minimum, it could be a week that after genealogy approved before it gets registered.
Right. Right. So it's a little bit, you know, it was a little misleading in a way, or confusing to people to see that genealogy approved date and then wonder why they haven't gotten their certificates yet. So that's why.
Okay. Any other questions?
I hope y'all learned something today. Even if you take away one thing that may help you, it's been worth it.
Okay, thank you, Denise. And for those of you who are looking for this to pass on to your friends, let them know that this will be recorded or is being recorded, and it'll be published sometime in the next 2 days. Thank you for your time, Denise. Thank you for your time, everybody from
Thank
the
you.
state of Georgia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Can you hear me for 1 second?
Oh, yes.
I have a question. I guess my thing was muted or something on.
Okay.
But I don't quite understand this. I've been told, say I'm doing a supplemental for my brother-in-law or whoever.
Mhm.
And I have the line, and then I can connect to a DAR record copy that was approved just last year, you know, so we're saying 2012. But that DAR record copy is approved off another DAR record copy that was approved, say, 3 years before that. And I've run into this because I've been told that you don't like to see that one from last year because it's approved off of another one that was approved earlier. Is that correct?
No, if they're okay. So several years ago, SAR passed a policy that if a DAR application was approved January 1st, 1985 or later, even though it doesn't have all the individual pieces of data checked off, because it relied on an earlier DAR paper, we can accept them. Now, there are going to be exceptions to that occasionally when we see a glaring error or a line or Patriot have been flagged. So you don't, okay, prior to that, change in policy, if we got a what we call center checked application from DAR, the applicants had to provide the previous applications that backed up the one they're submitting, or they'd have, and even multiple ones that backed up, or they'd have to submit the documentation. So this eliminated that. So no, to answer your question, you don't have, it can even refer to, and we're a little uncomfortable with this, to be frank, it can even refer to an application that was really old, that we don't know if there was documentation behind it. But if it was approved January 1st, 1985 or later, unless something has been flagged or jumps out at us as probably incorrect, then yeah, we usually accept those.
Oh, that's good to know, because I thought there was a new policy that said that you wouldn't accept one that was approved last year, even off of one that was approved. And I'm like six applications deep into this already. So that's $60. And you know, trying to find the original one.
If you've gotten those applications and they provide, if any of them have more check marks on them than the later ones do, go ahead and submit them. We'd like to have them if you've already paid for them. But in the future, you don't have to.
Now, with the new policy on the SAR approved applications, what is it? 2012, 2013, something like that?
Well, it's 2012, but some of those we're having to scrutinize a little bit more based on who reviewed them, based on the way people mark them. You know, we're all individuals and things have changed through the years. There have been policy changes since 2012. But you can usually count on those. It's
so
area.
So we get somebody that gives us a 2009 SAR record copy. Are they just out of luck and they have to prove all the documentation?
No. It's not that. That's not part of the deal. We just have to check the documentation, and we'll have the documentation.
You went up there.
Yes.
Well,
We'll just have to check, and what you'll need to do is get a SAR record copy to see what was checked off, what was proved on that application.
Okay, and this is before the new, like, say one that was 2001 or something like that.
Well, any of those time periods, you're going to need to look at the record copy that you're basing your new application on to see what was approved.
But you're saying you'll have that documentation up there for a 2001 SAR application.
Yes.
Okay.
But don't.
This is David Ludley, State President of Georgia. Just wanted to thank you for this very helpful information.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you for rounding up the troops to attend. And if anybody ever has a specific question, email me and I'll try to answer it. My email is dhall@sar.org.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Last minute questions. Going.
Hey, would you look at mine?